We're with Michael Schiess in Alameda, California, the Pacific Pinball Annex, and he would like to share his insights and some personal experience into how pinball machines developed and how they were regulated.
Yeah, thanks, Murray. The first object that we have here is one of the early pinball machines that was created in America by Montague Redgrave in 1869. He was the one who turned in a working model to the U.S. Patent Office, and he got the patent on the plunger. Before that, people used a cue stick to shoot the ball up. He also got a patent for the bells that he put on there that added sound to pinball. At this point, it was called bagatelle from the French, and was originally created in France in 1776, almost 100 years before this. And it was a game of the royalty that was brought over by the soldiers when they helped us fight our war against the Brits. They didn't have a standard for pinball, and Montague Redgrave pretty much created a standard for pinball and created the spring-loaded plunger. So he held the first 2 patents on pinball. I'd like to show you a few of the further advances that happened after this. So these first games here are the ones that really started pinball in America in terms of mass production. This first game was made by Gottlieb in 1931. This was 2 years after the Depression. So people were looking for escapism. They were looking for some way to make a little bit of money. Prohibition was still in effect. That didn't end till 2 years after. So they looked to these games as a source of entertainment and escapism. The early bagatelles that Montague Redgrave made were used in bars. People would kind of use them like liar's dice. They would play the game. Usually the bartender had one and he would loan out. People would play it, and the winner would not have to buy the drinks the next round. In this case, what they did was, off of an earlier game, they came out with some other patents. They put glass on the top. They put a coin chute on there, so you'd have to put a coin in to play the game. And these were on countertops in candy stores and bars and smoke shops. And generally, the idea was you played the game, and if you got a high score, they had prizes that you would win. Candy, cigarettes, a free drink, but it cost money, and the glass was there to keep you from cheating. Now, the development of pinball has a lot of innovations in it, and we'll get to some of those later, but one of them was the fact that you could, when nobody was looking, you could lift the machine up and roll the balls around and put them into high-scoring pockets. The glass kept you from reaching in there and putting them in there, but they didn't have any kind of mechanism yet to keep you from doing that. And again, the reason that Gottlieb was so successful with this was he had the manufacturing down. He could crank out quite a few of these, and in fact, I believe he manufactured over 50,000 of these devices back from 1931 to 1932. It was truly beyond a fad. These things went everywhere, and it quickly generated manufacturing to the tune of 130 to 150 manufacturers in America alone making these pinball machines. And still at that point, no flippers, and it was purely a gambling device. The other thing that happened was Mayor LaGuardia had started a campaign against slot machines and any form of gambling. So it kind of left an empty spot, a little vacuum that these pinball machines really filled, because they didn't look like a gambling machine. It looked more like a game of that you were playing. It looked like you had a pretty good chance to be able to pull the plunger back just right and put the ball into a high-scoring pocket. And they were very successful in that. These machines made a ton of money, and it's hard to fathom how much money they made. That also attracted organized crime because it was a cash business. So the organized crime or mob actually invested in factories that built these machines, and the manufacturers were therefore indebted to organized crime to pay off their loan for their factory. So that's how they got involved. They also got involved in the scheme of who operated these machines. There was a whole hierarchy between the manufacturer, the distributors, and the operators. And if you didn't follow that chain of command, you were out, and you weren't allowed to participate in this incredibly rich scheme. So some of the advancements in pinball, besides the glass and the coin chute, were getting patents. And at one point, Mills, which was a slot machine manufacturer, decided they were going to corner the market on pinball. And again, this is in its very early stages, in 1933, 1934. They bought up all the patents. They bought up the patents on the plunger, on the ball lifters, on the coin chute, and they basically tried to put everybody else out of business. They introduced this machine here, which was called the Mills Official Pinball, and it was basically, everybody put your pencils down. This is pinball. This is what it looks like, and this is what it's going to be from now on. Is the official pinball because we say it is. Well, it's clear that what happened was all the other manufacturers got their own lawyers. They actually bunched up and took on the Goliath, Mills. Mills, again, they had lost the slot machine franchise because Mayor LaGuardia had pretty much snuffed that out. So they were going into pinball in competition, and they wanted to put everybody else out of the business. So in taking everybody on, it ended up in court, and they lost. It isn't clear exactly why they lost, other than the little manufacturers had enough lawyer power to make their case that this would be a bad thing. Mills still was in the pinball game for a few years, but they did not last, as did many of the other manufacturers. As I said before, there were up to 150 manufacturers. It dwindled down to just a handful after that. And we'll talk about the evolution of mechanical games, which these were, into the introduction of electricity. That's what we'll talk about next. So at this point, all machines were mechanical, and you had to add up the score yourself. This is a game that started introduction of these, what we call toilet lids. They're little flaps that when you reset the game, they sit up and they can catch a ball. When they catch it, they flip down. But they all have points associated with them. You had to add up your own score and call the barkeep or the store owner and say, hey, I have a high score that qualifies me for a prize. And mind you, on all machines, they all said, no gambling, no prizes awarded, and all sorts of disclaimers, but everybody knew all you had to do was get a high score, talk to the store owner, and they would pay off. So at this point, there was one Stanford graduate named Harry Williams, and most of the machines are, at this point, they're being manufactured in Chicago. But Harry Williams was down in LA after graduation, and he got the idea of adding electricity into the game to make it more interesting. And his first game was called Contact, and it basically had a little solenoid that kicked the ball into a higher scoring pocket. This is an example of one of his games from 1935 that also used electricity, and it basically used a little solenoid to kick this arm around. And when you got the balls in a certain place, this arm would deposit it in the clock face. And if you got it up to 5 o'clock and put a few balls in high-scoring pockets, it was a big prize. The other thing that came with this game, though, was a mechanism called a stool pigeon. And this was the first introduction of his major invention, which was the tilt device. Now, this made it so that if you shook it too hard, the little ball would fall off a pedestal and alert the operator or the store owner that you had cheated. Basically, you'd shook the game too hard and tilted it. They called it back then. They called it gunching, when you would shove it around like that. And his first attempts were kind of hilarious. He initially put 50-pound bags of sand inside the machine, and he also took little nails and from the inside pounded them out, so that if he attempted to shake it or something, A, it was really heavy, and B, it actually poked into you and it hurt. Well, nobody wanted to play the game, so he had to come up with another idea, and his idea for the original tilt mechanism was a little pedestal that would hold a ball up there until you shook it too hard, and that was the stool pigeon. It quickly became a even simpler device, which was a pendulum inside a little ring, and if you shook it too hard, the pendulum would make electrical contact and tilt the machine. So once electricity came into the machines, we had a whole other generation. The mechanical machines lasted just a few more years, and they really had to depend on some innovations, and I'll show you one of those machines next. So again, being mechanical, they wanted to introduce something that made it easier to play. This is one of the first machines that adds up your score for you. It has a dial indicator here. The balls drop in and it pushes that dial a little bit further, so that the owner, operator can look at that immediately, see if you have a high score, instead of having to add up all the points. At this point, there was a manufacturer who was more in tune with making jukeboxes and other arcade devices. He entered the pinball area with these 4 mechanical games, and this is one of them. It's called Play Ball, and it's a purely mechanical game, but it's one of the most popular games that were made back then. You put your nickel in there, and it is a game of baseball where you are trying to get a ball right into this area here. Let's see if we can do it. It's pretty hard. If you don't get it in there, then you get a ball, or you get a strike, or you get right into an out. It gives you 3 outs, and that's 1 inning. So you're basically playing an inning of pinball. This game was incredibly popular. There I got a strike. So the thing that was amazing about it is you get 3 strikes, that becomes an out. You get 4 balls, that becomes a run. Here we go. Here's a run right here. Once you get a ball, it goes on to the first base. You keep doing that, and it becomes a run, and you add up your runs down there. You can keep playing this game until you get your 3 outs. Incredibly popular. I'm not sure if they, oh, there goes another run. Then there you go. So it's all mechanical. The turntable is wound every time you push a ball up to play it. And when we've had exhibits at one of them we had was at Google. There, I got 3 men on a base. I guess I'm pretty good. It was amazing that the engineers, even though they had all this high-tech stuff, they were lined up to play this game here. It was in 1934. Oh, there we go. And I got a run, so you can see how that works. It's pretty amazing. This mechanical era only lasted 2 more years, and then it pretty much everything had to become, had to have an electrical component to it. And so we'll talk about that next. So this machine introduces 2 things, electric power and also early back glass. So the idea behind this one is very simple. It's chess or checkers, and the object is to get a ball into every one of the holes there. There's 12 holes, and you get 12 balls. When you get that pattern there, it actually light up one of the cards there. If you got all 8 cards, it actually tells you right here on the awards that you would get 20 credits, and in a nickel a game, 20 credits is $1. So you could basically win $1 if you got all the balls in every hole. Pretty hard to do. Again, this is the first, or not the first, but a very early backglass. I'm not really sure what the very first backglass was. But in this case, the reason for it was to indicate your score. You didn't have to add up your score on this. They could just look there and see, hey, did you light up one of the cards? This was developed by advertising posters as some of the early silk screening on glass, which had never been done before. The other thing that this is great for demonstrating is actual tilt mechanism, or that in this case is called the stool pigeon. So you have the ball there and it's sitting on a pedestal. Now if I shake it too hard, it falls off. When it falls off, that's it. You have to put another nickel in. So you put another nickel in there, and then it slowly comes back up, and on this little pedestal it's got a little concave to it, so it doesn't want to fall off unless you really shake it hard, and then it falls off. So pretty cool, pretty foolproof. So once it does that, the game's no good, no payout. Next I want to talk about the most popular pinball game ever made. It was made in 1934. So this game, made in 1934 by Rockola, David Rockola, the owner, is the most popular game ever made, even in flipper pinball, even in modern pinball. The highest selling game in modern pinball was about 22,000 units. This one sold over 75,000 units. And it was purely mechanical, and it was called World's Fair Jigsaw, and it has a picture of the World's Fair in Chicago back from 1933. The way it worked was, again, it's all mechanical. You put a nickel in there, and it's a little sticky, but all the jigsaw puzzles would flip down, and you had to launch balls and put them in the proper holes up here in order to flip over all of the puzzle pieces. If you got them in the top holes, it would flip over more. So if you got them in these top holes here, it would flip them all over in that perspective row. The idea, obviously, is to complete the puzzle, and that's how you would win a prize. Very, very hard to do, and there it completed that one. So people love this. I mean, it really sold more than any other machine ever made. And a little finicky, but pretty amazing, and purely mechanical. No flippers, just an amazing machine. Next, we're going to go to some of the more advanced electrical machines that really made pinball gambling and made it easy to gamble. So this is one of my favorite machines ever. It is Vally Bumper. So this is a machine that made it so easy to gamble because you did not have to add up your points, and it introduced the bumper, and when the ball hits it, it makes an electrical contact that adds up the score on the little projector. So I'm going to start another game here. Oops, got it tilted. There we go. So when you get 5 balls, when you launch a ball, you're looking to hit one of these bumpers, and every time it hits one, you get 10 points. So how easy could that be? You can have a beer in one hand, a cigarette in the other, launch your balls, and that's what this kind of gambling was all about. No flippers, so no chance. There's a timer on these things that times out after a certain amount and shuts the machine. So you got to fire your balls off pretty quickly. I think this one's adjusted pretty short because we don't want to keep it on too long. This game changed everything. Mayor LaGuardia in New York hated this machine. There's a great picture of him in his white suit pushing one of these machines over. At our museum on Webster Street in Alameda, we have one that was confiscated by the Oakland police in 1936, and instead of being thrown into the bay, it was more or less a high-tech piece of equipment back then. I guess they didn't have the heart to just throw something like that away. So they brought him to Alameda, which was at that point infamous as a party town. And they gave him to the Alameda policemen as gifts. When I first started the museum, this ex-policeman and his twin brother both received these. They were both policemen back in the 30s in Alameda. And that is how we got our first Vally Bumper, and I learned about the whole history behind it. Just fascinating, and it's understandable why these were so notorious, because people at a nickel a shot would be just dumping money into these things. They made an incredible amount of money. Mayor LaGuardia had no qualms about making them illegal in New York City, scooping them up. He would even brag about taking the wooden legs and fashioning them into billy clubs that he would use to beat the operators with. So it's just, when you find out about the incredible history behind these machines, you start to understand the gambling aspect of it, and why people looked at them as really evil machines. They didn't look at them as amusement machines back then. People lost their paychecks on these things. They're very addictive. It was so easy to play this game. Just put another nickel in and fire the balls away. So I could see exactly how it got as notorious as it did. I remember one night I was trying to get the high score on it, and I went through half a bottle of Jameson's trying to get the high score, which I finally did, and I've never drank whiskey since. So we'll talk about some of the achievements after this, which was the first game to have these bumpers and really brings electricity up to the forefront on pinball machines. Okay, so we just took a look at the Vally Bumper, the first machine to use bumpers for scoring. This is its second cousin called Skipper, and it's a payout pinball. Now these are kind of rare. Not many machines actually have a direct payout, but this one, you'll notice it has one window for your score. It had a second projector unit for the free games. Now that was an option that you could either take the free games or take the payout. The payout was provided in a little secret drawer that would pop out right here, and your nickels would be waiting for you. So pretty sneaky that they would do something like that. But it was Vally's was very much interested in gambling and pinball. That was their main impetus. They perpetuated that a lot longer than all the other manufacturers. When flippers came out, and right next to here we have one of the early flipper games, and there's just two little flippers right here. They're not even set where they're normally found down at the bottom. They were still struggling with where do we even put these flippers. The early ones actually had 6 flippers. This one was 1948, I believe, and they were really struggling. The manufacturers were really struggling to make pinball acceptable, because this is after the war. They're finally letting them make pinballs again, and they wanted to make them more acceptable to the general public. So by putting flippers on here, you now had a chance to send the ball back up to the top, and it required some skill. There were flipper buttons on the side of the cabinet that allows you to hit the ball when it came near the flipper. And therefore it just wasn't a basic bagatelle game where your gravity would just pull the ball down to the bottom and you couldn't have any say in the matter. This allowed you to interact with these flippers, hit it back up, score some more points. It made it an interactive game, and it made it a game of amusement, and that's what they kept pushing. Although when pinballs were made illegal in 1936 by Mayor LaGuardia, In New York, they did not become legal till over 40 years later, 1976, when they had a good pinball player come in and demonstrate. Roger Sharp demonstrated to the city council that he could indeed beat a pinball machine using flippers. And that finally ended the ban on pinball in New York. So to follow up on the machines that were payout machines, a lot of people wonder, well, gee, what happened during the war, World War II? Well, Mayor LaGuardia had a say in that one also. He decided that pinball machines were sucking up resources that were needed for the war effort: copper, glass, solder. So he managed to push through legislation that banned the manufacture of pinball machines in the United States from 1942 until 1945. So pinball manufacturers were not allowed to make new machines. However, they were allowed to modify existing machines in order to keep up with pop culture or the big interest in the war. So what we have here is a Stratoliner, which was donated by Pat Bloat in Southern California. And his father had this machine, and he restored it beautifully. And you'll see it says Stratoliner on there, and it's got American airplanes on there. And it's keeping in theme with the war, which we were not quite in at this point. This is a 1941 machine that was built right before the ban. After the ban, they would take machines like this, and in order to make them popular again, they would come up with themes that might be offensive these days. In this case, they changed the back glass and some of the pop bumpers to slap the Japs. We replaced all the airplanes with destroyers, and again, they have fighter planes there. But they have pretty derogatory pictures of Tojo and Japanese soldiers, and it was all about bombing the Japanese. Now, oddly enough, we are in Alameda, California, which is where the first strike against the Japanese Empire in World War II happened. So the airplanes that Jimmy Doolittle had, B-25 Mitchells, actually left from this naval air station less than a quarter of a mile from here. They loaded up the original USS Hornet with I believe 12 planes and left on what was considered to be a suicide mission. So part of the responsibility of us as a pinball museum is to bring sometimes offensive material like this to the public, but we feel it's very necessary for us to do this because otherwise history gets forgotten and things like this don't get counted. So this is the first in a series of machines that we have. We haven't brought out the rest of them yet, but there were quite a few machines made with this type of back glass and this general direction of bomb the Axis rats, slap the Japs, kill Hitler and his goons. I mean, they had some pretty awful titles, and they were pretty offensive. As a nonprofit museum, a lot of people assume that we are sponsored by the city of Alameda. We are not. We do this for a love of the preservation of these pinball machines. We do it totally from the money that we make from admissions to our museum on Webster Street and donations from people like you that care about history and its preservation. We have over 1,500 games, mostly pre-1960, and we also have brand new games. We've contributed to the perpetuation of pinball, where it was dwindling down to one manufacturer. There are now 12 manufacturers. So pinball has again experienced a resurgence, and some of it due to some of the work that we've done in our shows. So appreciate you watching and your interest in this, in pinball and the history of pinball and its development. Thanks.